In this lesson, we're going to slow things down a bit. We're going to practice slow flight or flying just above the stall speed. Master slow flight, and you are indeed on your way to mastering the airplane. Remember, do your homework before starting this flight. We're up in the air at 4,000 feet over Puget Sound, a nice, safe altitude. I want you to feel comfortable operating at slow speeds so you'll know how to control the aircraft as you're operating in the traffic pattern and when you're approaching to land. Because slow flight is close to stalling, you'll need to know where the critical spots are. But don't worry, I won't let you get into too much trouble today. No, I'm not wearing a parachute either. If you see me wearing one, then that's when you need to start worrying yourself. I'd like to demonstrate the relationship between airspeed and angle of attack. You could read more about it in the ground school section. As we reduce the power and airspeed decreases, we need to increase the angle of attack to maintain sufficient lift for level flight. As we increase power and the airspeed increases, we need to decrease the angle of attack to maintain altitude. This relationship between angle of attack and airspeed is an important one. It's a relationship that you can't get out of, nor should you want to. Watch how I must increase the pitch attitude, or angle of attack in this case, to hold altitude as the airplane's speed decreases. As the airplane slows down, I must increase the angle of attack to maintain sufficient lift to keep the airplane flying in level flight. As the airspeed decreases below 70 knots, you can easily see how much the angle of attack must increase to keep the airplane in the air at this slower speed. You can fly an airplane at any speed between cruise speed and stall speed. Now, what's stall speed? Well, that's coming up in a future lesson. The most important thing here is to understand that as you slow the airplane down, you must increase its angle of attack to maintain the desired flight condition, which, in our situation, was straight and level flight. And you'll need to add power to remain in straight and level flight. Are you ready? Let's go. Reduce the power to about 1500 RPM and allow the airspeed to slow to 60 knots. Slow down. Bank the wings less. When you get there, you'll have to increase the power to nearly 2,000 RPM to maintain 4,000 feet at 60 knots. You're too low. Climb. Bank the wings less. Make small adjustments to pitch to maintain 60 knots and adjustments to power to hold 4,000 feet. Use sufficient nose-up trim to reduce the back pressure needed on the joystick to keep the airplane in this attitude. This is how you enter slow flight while maintaining your altitude. So, if you're following a slower airplane as you're approaching to land, at least you know how to slow down to avoid chewing off the tail of this airplane with your propeller, right? This is also another reason why we practice slow flight. Bank the wings less. Excellent. Now I want you to exit slow flight and return to straight and level flight at 4,000 feet. I'm still controlling the bank for you while you do the rest. Bank the wings less. I want you to add power and simultaneously lower the nose. As the airplane begins to accelerate, lower the nose at a rate that allows you to maintain altitude. See how the airplane is accelerating while maintaining altitude? Fantastic. When you reach 100 knots, reduce power to 2,500 RPM and trim for cruise flight. You're too high. Descend. Push the throttle in more. When you reach 100 knots, reduce engine RPM to maintain 100 knots. This is how you exit slow flight and return to a faster cruise flight condition. You remember when I said we always use attitude, power, and trim in that order? Well, there are a few exceptions. One is when exiting slow flight. It's best to add power and simultaneously lower the nose. If we lower the nose first, then added power, we might lose a little altitude as we accelerate. No sense doing this if we don't have to. You can see that in order to maintain altitude, you must decrease the wing's angle of attack. Do you see how a faster speed allows the airplane to fly at a lower angle of attack? Can you see the relationship between angle of attack and airspeed? Now, if you're not getting this, refer to the ground school session on the topic of slow flight. This is a very important topic, and you must understand the aerodynamics involved here for any of this to make sense. I think you probably have many questions, but now it's time to practice on your own. I'm going to cut you loose to practice entering and exiting slow flight. So practice flying at speeds between 100 knots and 50 knots. Hopefully this won't put knots in your stomach. Make sure you maintain altitude as you do this, and if you're feeling daring, you can even try a small turn while you're in slow flight. Just add power as necessary to maintain altitude and adjust that pitch to maintain your airspeed. In this lesson, we're going to slip those surly bonds of Earth and take our rightful place in the air where we belong. In other words, takeoffs. We're here in the Cessna 172 SP at the hold short line of runway 19 at Bremerton National Airport in Bremerton, Washington. We aren't going anywhere just yet, so relax just a second. Takeoffs are easy, and it's great to get airborne. There's not much to it. As you probably remember, all you had to do is set full power and steer down the center of the runway. When you get enough speed, simply raise the nose a bit and the airplane will take off. All we're doing here is accelerating to a sufficient speed so that the wings can generate the lift necessary to keep us in the air. We do, however, want to make sure of a couple things first. The most important thing to remember is that we always take off into the wind when possible. By pointing into the wind, we start with a little air blowing over our wings to begin with. This means that we'll be able to reach our minimum liftoff speed of 55 knots sooner and become airborne sooner. In the process, we'll use less runway during the takeoff roll. Today, we have calm winds, so takeoff direction isn't an issue. Check the final approach path for airplanes. Use the hat switch or make sure your numlock light is on and press the number 4 key on the numeric keypad. Then check the runway for airplanes by using the hat switch or the number 6 key. If the final approach path is clear, we can taxi onto the runway. As soon as we taxi onto the actual runway surface, that runway belongs to us and no one else should be using it. As soon as we taxi onto the actual runway surface, move the stick all the way to the right, or if you have a joystick you can twist it all the way to the right to line yourself up with it. Then return the stick to the center once you're pointed the right way and come to a stop by using the period key or the trigger on the joystick. Don't spend too much time taxiing around trying to be exact about it. Otherwise you'll use that precious runway, and one of the most useless things in aviation is the runway that's behind you. Are you ready? Let's go. All right, Captain, let's do the before takeoff checklist. Cabin doors and windows closed and locked. Flight controls free and correct. Fuel selector both. Mixture full rich. Elevator trim at takeoff setting. Before takeoff checklist is now complete. Of course, in a real airplane, we take a lot more time to complete this, but now it's time to fly. Take a deep breath, let it out, and apply full power with the throttle or by pressing F4. Check the airspeed indicator. When it reaches 55 knots, gently ease back on the joystick to establish a climb attitude. This is called rotation and has nothing to do with the airplane's tires. Push forward on the stick. Bank the wings less. Look at the attitude indicator. Make sure the little orange dot is on the second line in the blue part. This gives you the approximate attitude necessary for takeoff. Keep it there until the airspeed reaches 75 knots. As soon as it does, increase the climb attitude a little further until you're about 12.5 degrees nose-up pitch, which is between the second and third lines. Adjust the pitch up or down slightly, as necessary, to maintain 75 knots during the initial part of the climb. Speed up. Okay, although I try never to say that's about all there is to it, well, that's about all there is to it. Of course, there's a lot more to it than that. You'll need to worry about crosswind takeoffs, traffic patterns, air traffic control, other airplanes, and 100 other things. But now you understand some of the most important aspects of the takeoff. You can end this lesson by pressing the escape key, or you can rerun it by pressing the control and semicolon keys. As with all things in aviation, the best advice I can give you regarding takeoffs is practice, practice, practice. I've got the airplane, so you just relax a bit. In this lesson, we're going to land back at Bremerton National Airport. It's almost dinner time, and I hear they have some pretty good fish and chips there. We already did one landing back in the intro flight. Today, we're going to do several more, but we're going to learn a great deal more about what's going on. I've configured the airplane for a descent at 75 knots with 10 degrees of flaps, which will be our final configuration for landing on this approach. We'll land without full flaps on this demonstration. I think it's time for you to take the controls. Notice that our power setting is 1900 RPM. This allows us to descend at a 500 foot per minute descent rate. I'm adjusting the pitch to maintain 75 knots. If at any time I thought I was too high, I'd reduce the power, perhaps a few hundred RPMs at first. If I thought I was too low, I'd add power, perhaps a few hundred RPMs initially. Yes, I'd always readjust my pitch to maintain precisely 75 knots. The question is, How do you know if you're too high or too low? Turn right more. You may have noticed the hoops we're flying through. That's a device used in Flight Simulator to help pilots become familiar with the maneuvers required for landing. As long as we stay inside those hoops, we will land right on the runway. Don't worry about hitting them. They're magic hoops and they won't hurt us. Ordinarily, we'd fly a standard rectangular traffic pattern to approach Bremerton and land. But today we have a clearance for a straight-in approach. Turn left more. You're too high. Reduce power. Bank the wings less. Of course, the key to making your first landing a good one is to let me, your instructor, help you, which I'll gladly do. You will, however, do the most important part, and that is the landing flare. In the meantime, understand that the secret to landing any airplane is to keep from working too hard. When you have the airplane properly trimmed for the right airspeed, and you keep the wings level and make small adjustments to power, the airplane will practically land itself. Bank the wings less. Slow down. We'll maintain this speed until we're past the threshold and are at 10 to 15 feet above the runway. Then, reduce the power and flare the airplane for landing. Don't worry, I'll talk you through the flare. In the meantime, to flare means to raise the pitch of the airplane just enough so that the main landing gear touches down before the nose gear does. You'll do this by reducing power and pulling back slightly so the VSI shows no more than a 100 foot per minute descent rate. Then, as the airplane slows further, you'll raise the nose to a 14-degree nose-up pitch attitude and hold the nose there until the main wheels touch down. See the beginning of the runway? That's the runway threshold. You always want to land beyond the threshold. We're coming up on flare height. As you approach within 100 feet of the runway, resist the temptation to start pulling back. This is a common problem with students during their first few attempts at landing. Wait until you're at flare height to start pulling back on the joystick. We're now at flare height. Reduce the power all the way to idle and raise the nose slightly to slow our descent rate to less than 100 feet per minute. As the airplane slows down, raise the nose to a 10-degree pitch attitude. Hold the nose there. As soon as we touch down, lower the nose to the ground and activate the brakes by holding down the period key or the trigger on your joystick. We'll stop here on the runway and talk about what we've done. Well done. What we have done here is learned about the poppy, thresholds, and a little about the landing flare. What we are going to do next is the same approach in landing as before, except without the hoops to fly through. This will teach us to depend on the poppy and help us to learn what the runway should look like during the approach in case the poppy is out of service. If you finish the ground school reading on landings, you should be ready to try the second landing lesson. I'll be here waiting for you when you're ready. This is the second landing lesson. If you haven't taken the first landing lesson, hit the escape key to end this lesson and go back to lesson 6. We're back on a long final at Bremerton National Airport. The approach is the same as the first landing lesson, except we don't have the hoops to fly through. This time, you'll control the airplane on the approach as well as during the flare. The only thing I'll do is keep your wings level for you throughout the landing. As before, the airplane is about 4 miles from touchdown at 75 knots with 10 degrees of flaps extended with the same power setting and descent rate as before. Okay, you've got the airplane. Take the controls. Always remember to use pitch to maintain our airspeed of 75 knots and use power to control the glide path. Here's one more tip for you. Take a look at our vertical speed indicator. At 75 knots, this airplane will need a descent of almost 500 feet per minute to make the runway. Notice the lights to the left of the runway. That's the PAPI, or Precision Approach Path Indicator. It's a set of lights that change color automatically to help you determine if you're on the proper glide slope. As you approach within 100 feet of the runway, resist the temptation to start pulling back. This is a common problem with students during their first few attempts at landing. Wait until you're at flare height to start pulling back on the joystick. You're too high. Reduce power. As soon as you feel you're over the runway and at 10 to 15 feet above it, I want you to pull the throttle all the way back and flare like we did last time. Remember, we land with the power at idle in this airplane. If you find yourself gaining altitude during the flare, ease up on the back pressure and let the airplane settle back toward the runway. Then begin the flare again. We're coming up on flare height. As soon as we touch down, lower the nose to the ground and activate the brakes by holding down the period key or the trigger on your joystick. We'll stop here on the runway and talk about what we've done. Slow down. Turn left more. Stay on the runway. That was a good effort. Turn right more. Slow down. But while you landed on the runway, coming to rest in the weeds just kind of spoiled the picture-perfect landing I had in my mind. Okay, partner, now for the moment of truth. This is your first solo. You have the skills you need to make a complete circuit around the airport and land. I'll be telling you by radio when to turn to fly the pattern, but I won't be giving you many instructions about flying the airplane. I'd like to see you do that on your own. So I'm going to step out of the airplane now and let you fly by yourself for the very first time. But here's some last-minute advice. Be sure to reduce power as I direct you to when you're abeam the threshold. Don't forget that pitch, power, and trim is your key to a good landing for landing. Notice that the heading bug is set to the runway heading. Through the magic of simulation, the heading bug will move to the heading I want you to fly when I tell you to fly them. So pay attention to it when I tell you to turn. All right, time to solo. So here you go. I want you to take off, climb to 1,500 feet, and maintain 80 knots during your climb. Nice takeoff. Continue your climb to traffic pattern altitude. When you level off at 1,500 feet, reduce your power to 2,200 RPM, which will have you flying the pattern at about 85 knots. Turn right more. Bank the wings less. Pull back on the stick. Turn left more. Bank the wings less. Okay, it looks like you've leveled off. So turn left 90 degrees to a heading of 100 degrees using a 20-degree bank. It's time to make another left turn. Turn 90 degrees to the left and fly parallel to the runway, opposite the direction we'll be landing. You're too low. Climb. Speed up. You're looking good. Turn right more. Okay, you're abeam the runway threshold, so apply 10 degrees of flaps, maintain your heading, and descend to 1,300 feet. Now don't forget to use the trim as needed. Now it's time to make another 90-degree turn to the left. So turn left to a heading of 280 degrees. Bank the wings more. turn right more. Now it's time to make your last 90-degree turn to the left. So turn left to a heading of about 190 degrees, and then make adjustments to line yourself up with the runway. Bank the wings more. Okay, the runway is in front of you, and it's time to show me how well you can land this airplane. You're too high. Reduce power. Start your descent and line up on a good glide path using the poppy. So come on down here and pick me up, and if you show me that you can land safely, I'll award you with your solo certificate. Slow down. Well done. Congratulations on your first solo. You did it all by yourself, and bandages, splints, and paramedics weren't involved. Good show.